have a great lesson I want to bring to you today, a training that is going to be super relevant to really anyone who takes sales calls, right? Because this is going to be all about objection handling, and that's always something that can be a tricky part of the conversation, right? I mean, it's super important to handle this correctly, and it's you spend a lot of time on the call leading up to this point, right? You're going to, have a good discovery portion of the conversation. You're going to, get to know your customer, figure out their pains, their problems. You're going to position your offer. You're actually going to make your offer and state your price, right? Then you're sitting there waiting, saying, all right, are they gonna buy a second feels like 30 seconds, and they're either gonna say yes and pull out their credit card to you and be ready to purchase, or they're going to have questions that they need answered, or objections that need to be handled, right? And what I want to do here is teach you, some of the very foundations or things that I've found to be, helpful in objection handling. And this isn't going to get too much into, if they say this, you say this, or if they say this, you say that, because we could go on for hours and hours. There's always something that someone could say and what you should say to it, right? That's working on being a good conversationalist. But if you get these foundations down, this is really going to help you with your objection handling. So let's dive into it right here. So I just have a little presentation or a document put together here just to give us some talking points and some context. So handling objections and how to easily navigate this part of the conversation. So at the very, very core of it, objection handling, I would say, is probably like 99% mostly about you or me, right? The salesperson approaching it with confidence, right? Because I see so many times people struggle with handling objections. It's because they're uncomfortable in that sort of setting, being a little, confrontational, right? You do want to, challenge people, but you want to do it in a caring way. So you don't want to be confrontational where it's abrasive, but the reality is that you do have to confront some things and help them overcome, certain beliefs they may have. And this can be uncomfortable. And if you're not approaching it with the confidence that you can just sit in those uncomfortable conversations and be willing to have them, the things that you say aren't going to matter as much, right? Because handling objections is really going to come with a confidence that you're leading your customer, right? And they're counting on you in that moment. So you have to be able to approach this part of the conversation with actual confidence. And if there's something inside you that goes, I'm just uncomfortable handling objections or talking in this portion of the conversation, or having a tough conversation with my clients, there's something internally that you need to work on, because ultimately what you have going on internally is going to project back onto your customer. And if you're projecting the fact that you're not comfortable having this conversation, or that you are you don't have the confidence, you're not leading them, it's they're not going to buy, and they're not going to believe you when you're saying the words to overcome the objection. So first and foremost, this comes with you approaching it with confidence. It's also important to note that you need to approach this portion of the call with respect and empathy, because the reality is people are allowed to have objections. They're allowed to have questions. They're allowed to have things that they need, or answers that they need or get clarity on. And it's okay, but you do have to, respect that they have that. You have to approach it with empathy, because if you're coming from just a judgmental place, or it's not coming from a genuine place, they're going to feel that. And if they feel judged, they're going to shut down, and their buyer defenses are going to raise. So it is important to really truly internally approach this with respect and empathy, right? Now, as far as kind of getting down to some of the mechanics of it, right, those are kind of the mind frames that you need to go into it with, is that you're approaching it with confidence, and you're approaching it on their end with respect and empathy for their position and the reason they have it in the first place. But ultimately, what you want to do is get down to the core objection and isolate it by asking direct and clarifying questions. Most times, objections people have is more it more kind of boils down to one main thing that they're worried about, or they need help overcoming. They can throw surface level objections at you. I don't have the money, I don't have the time, I need time to think about it, I need to talk with my spouse, right? But what you need to do is isolate those objections, right, by asking direct and clarifying questions. And a perfect example of, isolating an objection, right, is um, say it's the money objection. Hey, I don't have the money for that right now. You can say, okay, I totally understand. Say money was not an issue. Is there anything else you'd be looking for out of the program here? Is there anything that you feel is missing? Or if you had the money, you would have already done it already. And if they say, I would have already done it already, great, right? If they hesitate on that answer or they say they're looking for something else, that is where you can actually have a conversation around it, right? So it wasn't about the money, it was more about what was, going on with your program, right? If it is strictly about the money and they say they would buy, then you can say, all right, explain to me further. You say financially you can't afford it. What do you mean by that? And it's really just asking, again, clarifying questions and listening. And in this, right, a lot of times because you're the one approaching it with confidence and you're leading the conversation, a lot of times they'll kind of start rambling and they will start revealing the true reasons behind it, right? And a lot of times it comes down to fear-based decision making, or they're not confident that they can get the results, or there's something there that really is the deeper core to it. And it might not be just about the money, right? So really getting to the core of the objection is just by asking clear, direct questions and approaching that portion with confidence. And once you isolate the objection, then it's actually just coming up with a solution, right? If there is a legitimate, hey, I have $0, right? It's okay. Well, from $0, how do we find a solution to help you get this? Or you come down to it or you have the conversation and it comes down to the fact that it's not actually about the money, it's about a fear, and you address that fear and help them overcome it. So, again, a lot of times an objection is really centered around one main thing, and the things that they're saying before then are just kind of layers, and they're buyer defenses that they're putting up. And what you have to do there is stand strong and confident, show them that, hey, I'm not just gonna back down because you said you don't have the money. Let's talk about it, right? And again, you're doing this in a respectful and empathetic way, but you really need to get to the core of the actual objection, isolate it, ask direct and clarifying questions, and then help them overcome and see these things in a different way by using logic, right? We all know people buy because of emotions and then justify with logic. But what you want to do is just, you can mainly understand that they buy because of emotions, but what you can do is reinforce the logic. So you can help them see things from a logical perspective about why their line of thinking that's holding them back is actually not right, or it's, they could see it in a different way. Not that it's not right, but they could see things in a different way. So then if they do make the purchase, they'll come back later, or thinking back later when the emotions wear off, they'll still be able to logically justify it for themselves and they'll feel secure in that purchase. So I mean, look, that's kind of the foundational piece, right? Is, objection handling again is about you approaching it with confidence, right? The best objection handlers are one that can just look someone straight in the eye and ask a direct question and not feel uncomfortable doing it, right? And if you're in that part of the conversation, you've got bubble guts, you're nervous about it, you're like choking up a frog as you're having this conversation, it's, obviously there's something internally you need to work on. You approach it with respect and empathy, in regards to the customer. You get to the core objection, the one main thing that's holding them back. You isolate it and you help them overcome it by seeing things in a different way using logic. All right, then there's actually, best case scenarios that you can start pre-handling objections. After you have enough sales calls and you get objections, which is going to happen, you can start pre-handling objections in your conversation so you don't have as many to deal with at the end. And here's a couple quick basics for pre-handling objections. If you hear someone say something that raises a concern that may be a potential objection, or you see body language, if you're explaining something and they look confused or they look unsure, they roll their eyes, right? Like, you need to be looking at these things and you try to handle it right there during the conversation before you actually make your offer, not after. The you lose leverage in objection handling if the objection's talked about after the offer is made. If you can handle as many objections before the offer is made as possible, you have leverage still, and it's easier to do at that point in the conversation than after the offer is made. So if someone, kind of brings something up in the conversation that you think, all right, that's going to come back to bite me later, address it right then and there. Something like the spouse objection, right? Oh, I need to talk with my spouse. If you hear earlier in the call, oh, my husband, he's not so supportive of this. He's always a bit skeptical of doing these sort of things, right? Like that's a red flag. You should talk about that right then and there, and say, hey, well, if you decide you wanted to continue on with this, what's his thoughts going to be, right? You want to have that conversation right then and there, not you make your offer and then it's, oh, I got to check in with my husband. It's like you've lost the leverage in the conversation. So again, if you hear someone say something, this takes active listening. It's asking good questions, active listening, and finding things that could be objections later on. You handle it right then and there in the conversation. Then based off, again, your common objections that you're actually getting on your calls, you can add word tracks into your conversations based off your most common objections. So there's ways that, when you're kind of saying things in the conversation, and you're going to want to be intentional with it, right? A lot of times the conversation that you're having, you're intentionally working through it in a certain way. Like the framework that I have for you here, you're working through that framework intentionally in a way. And what you can do is add word tracks into that framework, into your conversation that handles these objections. And we can take a deeper dive into that at a later time. But if you keep getting the same objection over and over again, you should start thinking about what you can say earlier in the conversation and where you can fit it in to pre-handle that objection. And here's the absolute secret sauce. If you can do this, great, you will be a lot better at handling objections. If you can ask questions in ways that they overcome their own future objections before they have it, that's the absolute best. And kind of a great example is why now, right? So if someone, if you're getting a lot of objections where maybe it's not the right time or I need time to think about it, a very good question to ask in the actual conversation before you make your offer is, hey, I understand why you're doing this. Thank you for sharing all that with me, but why is now the right time? And I guess I mean more on a philosophical level, drawing a line in the sand and saying, I'm ready to do this right now. I'm not going to procrastinate. I'm going to take action. I'm going to take care of this now. Why is now the right time? And then what they're going to do is actually explain, well, I'm so tired of X, Y, and Z. I'm not feeling good. I need to make this change. They'll give you whatever reason they give you. But what's important is they're actually speaking that out loud, and they're saying it to you, but they're also saying it to themselves, and it's helping them realize, oh, I do need to do this right now. And they're kind of committing to it in a certain way. So later on in the conversation, it's not, oh, I'm not ready to do this now. It's like, no, you talked about that earlier in the conversation. And if at the end of the conversation they do say, oh, I need more time, or I don't think it's, I'm not ready right now. It's not that you ever want to throw things back in their face. You have to approach that gently, but you can say, hey, I mean, I know earlier in the conversation you said you were ready to go right now. Like, what's coming up for you? And a lot of times, again, it's fear, right? So, if you can, but the point of that is if you can ask questions in ways where the way that they're going to answer, they're actually handling the objection, pre-handling the objection themselves. That's the absolute best position you can be in. So that there is the foundations of handling objections. Again, there is probably a script out there for every single thing where if someone says this, you say this. And then if they say that, you say this. If they say that, you say this. And look, it's um sure, there's, that's beneficial to learn word tracks, but you really need to have the foundations first. And that's, you approaching it with confidence, knowing how to communicate with people, isolating their objections and just helping them overcome it. And in best case scenario, you can do that earlier in the conversation before you make your offer, as opposed to after you make your offer, because you lose a little bit of the leverage. That there is the basics of handling objections. Thank you so much for, if you're not here live, that's fine. If you're going to watch this replay, that's amazing as well. I appreciate you being here.